Hello, my name is Tony Chan, reporting for TelecomTV. Today with me is Stephen Hill, who's the Senior Analyst for Data Center Solutions for Current Analysis. Stephen, thanks for joining us today.
Hi Tony, how are you doing?
Very good, very good. We're going to talk about SDN and data centers.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic right now.
Can you comment on how SDN is actually impacting the data center?
In the United States, most companies had their own data center technologies that they've been building over the years. Whereas in Europe, in the APAC area, I find that there's a lot of companies who get their data center services from carriers and other providers. In the United States, it becomes an issue for companies to be able to justify the cost of upgrading the equipment necessary to make SDN possible. Now, SDN is a really important technology, but it's not a critical technology at this point because networks are working fine. If you look at the way original networking evolved, it was a matter of, say for example, building a kitchen, to oversimplify. You plumb all of your pipes to the kitchen and the kitchen worked fine. You made sure everything worked perfectly and you never worried about it again. In today's environment, say you move the kitchen, it required weeks or months of people to come in and move things around. Imagine moving your kitchen multiple times a day or an hour or multiple times a minute. Suddenly you start seeing the perspective of how much all of these changes are starting to affect the nature of networking, and this never was an issue in the past.
So through your research into this area, have you identified any particular cost savings or efficiencies?
Oh, absolutely. One of the real efficiencies offered by SDN is the automation process. Automation is probably the biggest time saver, but it also involves all of the services that are necessary to support the network, whether it's security, whether it's simply tracking the motion across on your network of a virtual machine from one physical system to another physical system. All of those required a lot of hands-on technology before. Now that's being handled by an automated process and a very accurate and fast process through SDN.
Okay, so how do you think SDN is actually impacting the design and operation of a data center today?
Well, it's still in the early days of SDN. So in the case, and I speak specifically of the United States market, from an SDN standpoint, you're finding that data centers are in the process of evaluating this technology now because we're still in the very early days of this technology. SDN through OpenFlow was introduced in 2008, and it's only 6 years in that time frame that companies have been able to adjust to looking at what the impact of this new technology will have. Again, I go back to the point of the amount of motion within the network itself has changed so dramatically that the savings of personnel and management costs will end up being one of the primary value points of SDN in general.
Okay. As somebody who will be building out or is trying to optimize the data center, what are some of the things that they should look for when looking towards an SDN, either a trial or implementation?
Very good point. The one thing that companies need to look at is this is probably the most interesting time in networking ever. I mean, it's been a very, very stable and easy to work in environment. Now we're seeing the types of automation and change occurring in the networks that occurred in servers and other technologies 10 years ago. And it's a matter of obviously catching up to what else is going on and adapting to it. So companies need to be looking at a couple of things that are very important. Number one is making sure that the type of SDN they're looking at is a good match for the environment that they run in. For example, VMware's NSX technology is heavily targeted on the virtualized workload. So the ultimate customer that it would fit properly is a customer who has a lot of virtualization and there's a lot of communication between the virtual switches involved. If you're talking about a more traditional data center or a data center where there's a lot of legacy applications, a more broad approach to SDN is usually more helpful because it allows them to shape all types of traffic, not just traffic that's targeted at virtualized machines. There's three major three major platforms that are evolving right now. One is the command forwarding network, which is the nature of OpenFlow. Then there is the overlay technology by NSX, which basically rides on top of the network and doesn't affect the underlying hardware. And then there's the new application-centric model from Cisco, and their idea is a somewhat more holistic approach, saying you should look at the specific nature and identify the specific nature of the flows that you're setting up, and then make sure that all of the devices along the chain are capable of doing the best they possibly can to deliver that product and that service properly. That's where the important thing for customers to look at making the change is to see how well that SDN environment impacts all of the aspects of their network, whether it's security or firewalls or load balancers. You need to make sure that your entire ecosystem is well addressed by the SDN solution you're making.
Okay. Lastly, how do you think SDN impacts connectivity between data centers?
Well, that's again dependent on a lot of future technology that's coming out. This is a little different in terms of the United States versus the rest of the world, because as I mentioned, there's a lot of customers who are purchasing their data center services in this part of the world, in the APAC community, from service providers. So they will be getting the benefit of their service providers' more efficient environment. In the case of data center operators in the world who have their own data centers, it depends on where if they're trying to connect to their own offsite or co-located services, they'll be dealing with one set of constraints. Whereas if they're working to look to the cloud, which is the obvious next logical step for this, and part of the whole reason why we're doing it, when you're connecting to the cloud, then it depends on the provider that you're going with in terms of your cloud services. So anyway, the goal is ultimately to make sure that your SDN solution works well with your targeted audience, whether it's your own co-located facility or whether it's one of the cloud providers, and make sure that their process, their procedures, and their organization is similar to what you're doing in your location.
Okay, Steve, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.